There should be enough packets for at least 2 or 3. You can go beyond. You can have 4. We'll allow it. Yes, all the packets are different. Some of them, you can see, have fruit on the top. They all have a common theme of vitamin C. So when you receive your packet, I already see some eager learners. They've pulled their items out. You have instructions. You have a colored piece of paper, or perhaps one has white. I want you to read these instructions and work with your group. There's 3 questions on the bottom that I'd like you to answer with your group. If you feel you need to record your answers, there's a pin inside. You also have a pin from the conference. You don't need to. But 1 or 2 from your group need to report out in 10 minutes. So you have about 10 minutes to work on your lesson. The way these questions are, the way that we model this group activity today is that typically the questions are, and usually the audience is a general education nutrition class. And there lies my issue with trying to engage with a range from freshman to senior, a requirement, a science requirement, some very avidly interested in the subject area, some not, and also the new requirements to be admitted to college don't necessarily mean that they can do math or have had any previous experience in science. We have different standards now of what students need to get into college. So I have a whole array of students that arrive in a science class, in a general education class. So trying to get each and every one of those students engaged is a challenge. So typically, with this type of exercise, one question is a comfort question, a question, yeah, I get that, I know that about this material. And that usually is a lure to get them involved in that material. It's a security blanket a bit to get them interested in the material. The second question usually is quantitative, because a big concern is to help them with their calculations and their math. And in nutrition, our math is math. In fact, a lot of the questions that I use in my nutrition class, last year in my son's 3rd grade class, I saw them in the California State Standards. I saw the questions about carbohydrates and proteins and fats. Very basic math, subtraction, addition, percents, ratios. I have students who will, in the past, if I were to give them that type of problem, just leave it blank. I don't do math. And they would take an 80 or 70% on an exam just to avoid math. They didn't not even want to attempt the problem. And this is nutrition math. So that second problem I always have as a quantitative problem that they do in a group, so that they can see, there's usually one in the group, someone else work through that problem. And then they can say, oh, that's not so bad. I can do that. Of course I can do that. So that's another layer to put math in. And then the third question, which I've already had a few groups, one in particular I'll call out to report, is a question that may or may not have an answer. So that is to attempt the and to push the critical thinking process, to get the student to understand that not every question has an answer or has a pat answer, or that it can't be put into a nice box, which is dangerous in nutrition because nutrition is very intimate. We all eat and we all know a lot about nutrition. So it's kind of dangerous, intimate territory when you walk into questions about nutrition. And I felt that a little bit as I walked around, because vitamin C is also, everyone has an opinion with vitamin C. We have our issues with that. So that being said, that's how that's set up, and that's to engage that student. And it has been effective. So let's see if it is today. I want to hear just on your answers first for a few minutes, and I'm not going to call in all 14 groups, I'm just going to call in a few, what you learned from that process and your answers, what were your questions, your answers, and then we'll go from there. So I only have, this is such a short time, 20 minutes, so I'm going to move from this model and kind of explain to you my journey, and I'll tell you why I went to this model first. I felt that, and we all do at some point where we reach that self-actualization in teaching. You feel, I can teach. They learn something. I can walk in, I know my subject, and they can ask me anything, and I can explain it, right? I am self-actualized teacher. And then you get past that 10-year mark, 11-year mark. I've been here 18 years. And somehow you go beyond that and you start experimenting because you're comfortable and confident, and you start reading those evaluations that say they're not learning from you anymore. In fact, some of them just don't like you anymore. And that affects how you come into the classroom. For me, because I'm such an emotional, reactive individual, I'm kind of defensive. Here's the material. I love it. Hope you love it too. I'm kind of like that Oscar Wilde, separated from my audience. And very ineffective, I learned. My traditional lecture defensive style just wasn't teaching my students. And so I had to admit that I was a failure. And so then I tried to experiment with lots of different things in the classroom, almost to the point, last night I wore a carrot to a party, a carrot costume, where almost to a point where I felt like I had to be so entertaining with them. And that really bothered me, that to get across the subject that I care about, that I'm passionate about, that I had to be a stand-up comedian to get them engaged. That was ridiculous. I got kind of upset that I would actually do that to get them involved in my topic. And then I'd get madder at them and more defensive, and the walls got bigger, the evaluations got worse. And then I read that they were really interested in doing this iPad study. And I think I was in the second or third generation of going out in the class to use the iPad. And it was like a perfect storm, because when I wrote it, I really wanted to buy one, and I wanted to get an iPad just to have an iPad, number one. So I was kind of selfish when I first thought, I want to do the iPad study because I'll get an iPad. And then I thought, wow, this would really work, because I never have 2 GE courses in one term. I always have one, but last spring I had 2 GE courses in 210, and they were back-to-back. I had them on the same days, and I had the labs on the same days. It was a perfect situation to compare a non-iPad class and an iPad class. So I wrote my proposal, and I was excited, and it was December by the time I heard that I was selected for the iPad study, and I would be doing it. And of course, classes started in January. And I had never been on an iPad till then. So I spent December looking at my iPad. I think I wasted at least 2 weeks looking at every app with every, I think I even went through the back of the glossary of my nutrition textbook and put in every word to see if there was an app for some of the amino acids. I mean, you have to really search in creative ways to find the applications. Now it's growing and it's developing, but it was really difficult. And I had hundreds that I looked at, free money. I had a budget of $45, which is a lot because most of them are 99 cents, and I was only going to use maybe up to 10. The students had a budget of $25. So I picked a mix of free and up to about $20 of these iPad apps. And we started the class. And I have to say the non-iPad class immediately was pretty upset because, well, they didn't get an iPad, but they were part of a study. They did get a $5 Starbucks card for being a part of a workshop. And I'll go back and then I'll cycle back to that. Not one student came to the workshops to talk about the iPad, whether they were in the iPad class or the non-iPad class. $5 just wasn't enough for them to get out of their lifestyles, whatever they were doing, to give their 2 cents on was it effective to use an iPad or non-iPad. And that was out of about 55, 60 students. Not one showed up for that free iPad. Every person in this room, you're here because you really love teaching and making sure that student learns. You're here, you're taking time. Thank you out of your day. Thank you for coming to my session. So for us, it's a foreign concept not to go. Yeah, it would be nice to get the card, but you would go to that session anyway to give the feedback and to participate in that process. So we actually had to manipulate them a bit and get their feedback during the final. So part of the final, they got a bit of credit for giving us their feedback. Plus, they still got their Starbucks because we had promised them the Starbucks card. So that it was a win-win for them, right? So that's a tough piece of getting feedback. Is technology really working or not? But the non-iPad class, thankfully, God was smiling on this whole process the whole time. They actually were they were a great group of students. So they got over the fact they didn't have an iPad. I did use the iPad in their class with examples up on the projector screen. I did do that. But in the iPad class, this class was interesting because it was my first class of the day. They met at 9 o'clock. They kind of acted nonchalant, like, oh, well, thanks, gee, I have an iPad, right? If we handed you all an iPad, like on Oprah, you'd be like, wow, I have a free iPad. You'd be so excited because you know the possibilities in them. But we were it was a bit, wow, thanks, right? So part of it was the class. I kind of had a flat class, which didn't make it a perfect storm between two. I didn't have a joyous class and a joyous class. I kind of had a flat and a joyous, so that made it hard. But we started with the iPad, and I told them all the things that we were going to do. It took 2 or 3 weeks to get connected, to get the correct lecture note. I let them choose the lecture notes that they wanted to use, whatever they wanted to choose for their app. For that, they could. It took another week to learn how to use courses, for them to actually learn how to put things into my file. It took me at least 5 weeks, well into the middle of the term, to get used to the 30 downloads I would get, to look at all their assignments. At first, it was at least just for management, 5 to 7 hours a week, just for management, not for teaching. I was overwhelmed. And then I learned a few of my students just outright told me they don't like technology. So I had a few students that still wanted the hard copies. So I would have the iPad, but then I'd have to make sure that they were getting the material covered, hard copies of the material for them too. So I had a whole range of comfort level with the iPad and the technology and using it. So it wasn't even across the board. And then, once we got going about middle of the term, it probably would have been more efficient had I had maybe started in the summer a little earlier than December and started in January. But middle of the term, we started to really use these iPads. And you know what I discovered? They're pretty good at using Wikipedia. In fact, they're masters at it. And Wikipedia has a lot of good nutrition information on it. Actually, a lot of it is accurate. I was actually impressed with some of the information they came up with. But they actually, when I first started to put some of this type of information in an activity, I'd have in a group maybe one looking at Wikipedia, another one kind of looking at me like, wow, another group activity. And then I would have another one talking to their friend on Facebook or whatever. So I had sort of that whole range and tried to not react. But I went to spring break feeling like a failure again. The self-actualization, I kind of went way down on my pyramid really, I was just surviving with my water and my food down there. And I was really bummed, in fact, really bummed, because I really wanted to teach them about my subject, and they didn't want, and I just felt like I'm disconnected to this generation. I don't get them, and they're too distracted. They want to do this Facebook. I had lots of issues with Facebook at that point. It made me full of anxiety every time I got on it. And so I spent spring break trying to figure out how not to lose them for the second half of the term. And really had no ideas that were really fruitful. Trying to do it on my own and trying to figure it, looking for more apps. I was furiously, again, like I was in December, looking at apps. And I have to say the apps in nutrition are pretty shallow. They're less than a centimeter deep. So they're basically, you know, an app on vitamin C would be, well, here's a list of vitamin C foods, and the ones that are rich are dark, dark orange, and the ones that don't have much are light, light orange. And, well, how useful is that, right? We kind of know high and low vitamin C. So a lot of the applications I found were pretty shallow for education. They were just quickly put on there because it's exciting, but they were not valuable. In fact, that's an area that the math department and I have talked a lot about, is developing meaningful applications. That was a hard issue. So as I was looking through all that, of course, who's walking through our halls? Who's always walking through our halls in natural science? Who's always interested in teaching? Who always asks you how your teaching's going? Who always wants to know, are you being a success in teaching? And usually I avoid this person if I'm feeling like a failure. I'm doing fine. I'm going to go get coffee. It's Steve Davis. And he's relentless. He said, how's it going with the iPad? He was very eager to hear how he's doing. I said, you know, it's just not working. They're completely unengaged with it. Same as they were when I was traditionally teaching. It's me. I should find a new job. Really? I'm not a good teacher. And he said, no, 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 that can't be it. That can't be it. And he actually told me a story. He went with, I think, the University Church up to Point Reyes, and they were out in the oyster flats. And it was with families. It was when his kids were young. And they were all digging oysters. And he was really upset at this father because there were 3 boys digging oysters, and they'd go, look, look, Dad, I got an oyster. And the dad would just keep digging and digging and digging. And he was really irritated that this dad didn't stand up and go, yay, it was good, you got an oyster, big oyster, wow, gold star, you got an oyster, right? And he watched this for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, to the point where he was going to go over and say to this man, you need to really be responsive to your boys. What kind of father are you? And then, just as he was getting upset enough to go talk to them, this father dug this oyster out and said, oh, I got an oyster, ran over to his sons, and he showed them, and all the sons were looking at the oyster, and they were comparing them, and it was an epiphany for Steve Davis. That unless you get dirty and messy and involved in learning, you won't learn. That father had just learned how to dig an oyster, right? And then together, the whole family was pulling him apart. So Steve Davis showed me this method, how to get students involved. Takes a bit of preparation to get everything organized and involved, but once you flip it, that's the new language, when you flip the classroom back to the student, right? Had to get that lingo in. I like that. We flip plates now, more fruits and vegetables, so I like that, flipping the classroom. The students they were really uncomfortable at first. When I came back from spring break and I had all these bottles of olive oil, they were uncomfortable. But within a week or two, they knew, oh, in order for me to be a better team member and not look like kind of an uneducated fool in front of the class, I need to read my textbook, I need to be a little more assertive, and I need to work with my group. And it worked. It really worked. And this was a group that was pretty flat to begin with, and I was able to revive them, resuscitate them towards the end. So that was that transition. It also then, I only have about 5 more minutes to share. It also gave me all summer to think about, okay, what about my majors courses? So these were GE, and that was a challenge, but I also have a challenge with my majors. So I reorganized. Well, one lesson I did learn. When I was self-actualized, the perfect teacher at 10 years, right? We've all been there. That's when I had everything organized, all my notes. I had layers and layers of years of my notes, lots of depth. And then I got sort of cocky with my teaching and more abstract. The more confident I got, the more I lost my students because I was in my own world. And they were like, how do you spell vitamin C? You know? So what I read over and over again in my abysmal evaluations is, I need structure. I need structure. I need structure. So this term, I went through all my notes. I realized, gosh, I really put too much on them. And I restructured all my notes. And I only have 7 to 20 pages per night for them to read. I specifically tell them where to read. I tell them the topic. For instance, tomorrow I'm doing the breakdown of glycogen, the synthesis of glycogen. I used to give them the entire chapter to read. Now I give them the figure, the table, the pages. And then now I model for them the questions that I would put there in a majors class. I will teach by those questions. And I've had several students say, I've never had a teacher do this. Usually they just say read chapters 2 through 85 and come to class. And it's overwhelming to them. It's that frustrating, this is too much. So I'm getting a lot of good feedback from that. And the other thing is with the iPads, when I was very uncomfortable, I used to be pretty upset if anyone turned their cell phone on or if they were looking at it. It really hurt my teaching ego that they were not focused on me and my material. And now I realize it's incredibly valuable, and they need to be comfortable. If they need to look at and check that, that's okay. But to engage them, to do something like this group learning that I demonstrated, they can't have that on, right? They can't have that on without letting their group down. So that was very valuable. But I'm also really fascinated with just letting them bring their computers in. And I had this incredible student just a day ago show me an application she found on her own, because I had told her, this is advanced metabolism. We're looking at vitamins and minerals. We have 9 of them. They have to learn all 9 of them by tomorrow. And I said, I used to learn on white pieces of paper. I used different colors for every vitamin. So I would learn orange for vitamin A or yellow for vitamin C. She showed me the index app. She color-coded all of her vitamins and showed me how the index cards go back and forth. And so that's incredible. I'll have her now come in and help teach the other students how to use that. So that's the last thing I'll leave with you, is that you have to be fluid and flexible, I think, now with teaching. We saw that at our faculty orientation. We had the whole range of teachers talking. And I think it is, we have to be out of our comfort zone to reach the current student. We really have to jump out, and they really want to be engaged. They love being here as much as you love being here, but I don't think they like to be talked at that traditional style. So that's all that I have to share with you this morning.